Folks, this is Tom Opry, your host to the podcast where we ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, we strive to help you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Stay tuned for another edition of Shepherds of the Wild.
All right, so D, for our video editors,
Yeah.
just tell me what your first and last name is and spell it, and then just tell us who you are.
Okay, my name is D Ward, D-E-E, Ward, W-A-R-D. I am the owner and manager of Rottle Estate, which is an upland estate in the Angus Glens in Scotland.
We're here because of the conservation management that you're doing here. So explain to me, what is Rottle Estate as far as what the big picture is, how long you've owned it, and start going into kind of just what you do out here to be environmentally sound and why the motivation you do it.
So Rottle is about 8,000 acres, 3,000 hectares if you are into European speak. And it's an upland estate. So typically an upland estate has grouse shooting on it, has a lot of moorland. What we're trying to do here is we're all in favour of that, but we're trying to create this balance between the uplands and where that merges into the lower ground where the rivers are at the bottom of the valley. So we're trying to create three sort of tiers effectively. So you've got the bottom where you have the pasture, you have wetland, you have good habitat for waders, things like that. We put hedgerows and things in as well, and a lot of riparian planting. We then have a sort of middle section which is native tree planting and some natural regeneration, and then the top is moorland, heather, grasses and so on, which is obviously very good for red grouse, black grouse, and also for waders and things like ring ouzels and a lot of birds of prey.
So you've done some very specific management improvements on the property. It's kind of what we've been told from Rory at GWCT, that this is kind of the poster child of what grouse moors should do. Why is this a good example of what grouse moors should be?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I probably
You could paraphrase it a little bit for me. I mean,
yeah.
We're often held up as an example as the right way to manage.
Yes, so I think that it's a broad question, but I think that one of the troubles with grouse shooting per se is that the worst examples are held up as the norm, and that isn't the case. So what we're trying to do here is to show that there's a balance, create a sort of balance between delivering net biodiversity gain and still having hunters shooting here, which brings in valuable income. And it's kind of creating that and showing that all of these things can be stacked on the land together and work together. And I believe that's possible, and that's what we're trying to do here. And so far, the results, definitely from the wildlife and biodiversity side, have been excellent. You know, if you come here, there's a huge amount of bird noise. You see abundant numbers of different birds. The jury is still out whether we can deliver the returns on the grouse shooting because we've just been through two bad seasons, like everywhere in Scotland. So I haven't proven that it works yet, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay. So what are the things you do? Kind of explain to me, like when we were driving around, you were showing me different things. Let's talk about, water starts at the top of the glen and comes down, and kind of explain to me what you've done to the land to enhance it and give me some idea of what the purpose of the things you've done.
Okay. So we're all getting more extreme weather events, especially in Scotland, I think around the world. So what we're finding is we're not getting as much rain, for example. We're getting the same amount of rain, we're just getting it in more concentrated amounts, so we get very bad flooding. At the top of the hill, we have a lot of peatland, which is degraded over hundreds of years. And and the peat is like a big sponge, basically. So what we're trying to do is restore that peat with a view that, one, it's good for wildlife and biodiversity, two, it stops carbon emitting into the atmosphere, but three, and most importantly to me, is it captures that water as a big sponge and it sits there rather than create flooding. because as soon as we create flooding, we damage our ecosystem. So that's what we've tried to do at the top of the hill. And I showed you a bit of peatland we restored. And what happens with that is you get a huge amount of new grass and vegetation growing there because it's not drained, it's now wet. We're sort of re-wetting this ground. And it just feels much more alive, really. And that's something that we're trying to do. Now, that sits, to me, very comfortably with the grouse side of it, because grouse, especially young chicks, like insects, and one of the things that this wet ground produces in abundance is lots of insects. So I personally think all of this goes very much hand in hand.
So explain to me, you were kind of showing us that, so give me, why were the ditches created? It was long before you got here, but now you've actually had heavy equipment in there plugging up in sections, kind of what you showed me, kind of explain what you told me last.
Okay, yeah, so you have to view what I'm saying in the prism of the Second World War, where we were as a nation after that, and the government's priority was very much food production. We had food rationing for years, and they thought, let's produce as much food as we possibly can. And in their wisdom, they thought that draining the uplands would create more grass so you could graze more sheep, etc. What in reality happened is that those ditches eroded a lot of the peat, and what a ditch that started, say, 2 foot deep, suddenly, when we came to restore it, was maybe 4 or 5 foot deep, and all that peat had eroded. It had dried out the surface layer. It meant the vegetation was dying off, and it wasn't producing any grass that they'd hoped. So what we decided to do, and this is, the governments have obviously changed their policy, which I welcome, but there was government grants available for us to go in there and plug these ditches up, block them up, create little small ponds or lagoons in these things, and put sphagnum moss into these lagoons, which have then started to grow. So what we've done is raise the water table effectively probably 4 or 5 feet, so it's now very close to the surface. And that has had a huge impact on the health of the moor.
Excellent. Yeah. So from that peatland area and the restoration you've done, coming down the hill, you have these drainages, we call them creeks. Yeah. But you have these are live water coming down. What did you do in those areas? Explain to me, from the peatland down to the next layer, what is that layer? What does it look like? And what did you guys do?
Okay, so the next layer, so we have, your creeks we would call streams, or in Scotland we call them burns, which are basically water that is running all year, quite small. Obviously, when there's rain, it floods and it flows harder, but it flows all year, even in drought. So what we've done with those areas, we haven't completely done this yet. We're working towards it, and it's a long project. But we are fencing along the edges of these, many meters, probably 10 or 15 meters back, and planting a lot of trees. So we're creating this riparian zone of trees. The aim is to create shelter and shade on the water to keep water cool. With rising temperatures, it's quite important for fish and invertebrates that live in there. But also the leaves generate a lot of insect life and invertebrate life that drop into the water and sort of enhance the river health, give food to the fish and the fish that live in the river, basically, in the streams.
Great. And then from there, you come down to the flatter land, the more prosperous farm ground. Talk to me about the things you've done there. What I'm looking for is, the hedgerows, the planting of the seed crops that facilitate the different birds that are eating there and create cover. And just kind of, maybe explain to me, when you first came here 19 years ago, because that was the ground that was probably scare rated pretty bad. Yeah. So explain to me, what did you find 19 years ago at the next level, and what have you done?
Okay, so when we came here, there was a huge number of sheep on the land, probably more than double what we've got now. The grass was very short like this all the way across. There was no difference of vegetation heights. No trees, very, very few trees. There were a couple of old plantations, but nothing much. What we've tried to do is kind of create a diverse habitat. So we planted hedgerows. We plant a lot of wild bird seeds mixes, which basically grow up quite high, and they create a lot of seed for small birds during the winter months. And game birds like pheasants and partridges, it gives them feed too. So we've done a lot of work on that, I would say. And the other thing we've done is we've created a strip of woodland, which we call a contour planting, that runs along the contour of the hill. So between the moorland on the top and the grassland at the bottom, we've created this strip of native trees. Some of it we planted, some of it we've just fenced and watched it grow, and it's been very good natural regeneration. And that's creating a really good buffer, which helps mitigate against flooding, improves the grassland below, and creates a really good habitat for wildlife. So that's been really successful. I mean, obviously we've only planted trees in the last 15 years, and up here at altitude things grow slowly, so they may be only 10 or 15 foot high now, but they are there and they're making a really big difference.
So talk to me about the wildlife. Talk to me about deer, talk to me about grouse, and talk to me about non-game wildlife here.
Okay. Right, where do we start? So again, going back to the sheep element, which is relevant to this because it's all about herbivore impacts, and we looked at the herbivore impacts, and one of those was we thought, well, we'll reduce the the sheep numbers down. But the other part of it, we had a huge number of deer. We had about 25 deer per square kilometre, and there was no way anything is going to grow with that abundance of deer on it. So we took a view that we were going to cull the deer, and that has been it's not the most pleasant thing to do, but we knew it was necessary, and it's been very difficult because to start with, some of my boundaries with my neighbours were not fenced, so more deer would come in as soon as we were killing them. So in the end, we ended up fencing the whole estate, and we've reduced the deer population to about 2 per square kilometre. So where we had probably 1,500 deer, we've probably got about 80 or 90 now. So made a big difference in that population. What that's done is made the hill really come alive, and it's made the deer that we have got much healthier, much bigger. It's taken pressure off the ground. Anyway, so that was a big starting point for us. Then what we've done, we very much believe that game shooting, this is my own belief, and I don't preach to anyone else because everyone has to, make their own decisions on how they do it, but we do not want to put any birds down. So we obviously grouse are wild. We have gamekeepers who do predator control, and that helps maintain a healthy population of grouse and black grouse. It also helps things like waders and all these ground nesting birds, because predation on ground nesting birds is particularly bad, and tree nesting birds really don't have anything like the pressure. That's why our ground nesting birds in the UK are reducing, and tree nesting birds aren't so much reducing. We've done that, and then on the low ground, what we've done is we don't put any pheasants down. We used to, but we decided not to. And we have now a wild population of pheasants, duck, mallard and teal on the wetland areas and on the river, and we kind of manage for those, and they breed in the wild, and that means we can do a limited amount of shooting, but it's all wild, and that sits more comfortably with what we're trying to do as an estate.
That's great. Talk to me a little bit more about the sheep. Of course, we talked yesterday about the fact that a lot of people, we never heard anybody talk about sheep the first 10 people we talked to. It was always about deer. Deer's a problem. But if you could kind of give us an idea that deer and sheep can be drastic, that can be a real issue. You've already said you've reduced the deer down to 2 per square kilometer. But how does that farming and the sheep work into this equation?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think I feel very much that we're not looking at the overall picture as Nature Scot, as a government, as Scottish government. Deer are being demonised, in my opinion, wrongly. They are part of the problem, but I think when there's an argument whether there's 150,000 deer or 1 million deer in Scotland, and different people will say different things, but let's just take the worst example of 1 million deer. When you've got 1 million deer, but you've got 10 million sheep, or whatever the number is, or 8 million sheep, sheep are obviously going to be part of that problem too. So we need to look at it in the round. And my view is we need to look at each land holding and say what is appropriate. Because one land holding might be appropriate to have a lot of deer and a lot of sheep. Another one might not be appropriate to have nearly so many, rather than make this sort of one-size-fits-all rule. So what we do independently, we just look at the land we've got, we manage it every day, we look at it every day, we decide what the right number is. And there will come a time where we probably need more deer. At the moment, it's not there. But as our trees grow, we're going to need things to get into those trees and actually break them open again, a bit sort of going back to natural processes. So, but we're at the early stage of that journey. So at the moment, we don't have it, but we will need to. So I think people have to understand that herbivore impacts are a fluid thing and you need to be managing them and monitoring it the whole time.
So how, explain to me this whole idea of having deer come back into these woodlands once they're established. What purpose do they serve historically, and what do they do to the ground?
Well, so I showed you a bit of our natural regeneration at the far end. This is the first bit we've done, and it is so thick now you could hardly walk through it. Now, woodland that's that thick doesn't let light in, and actually, having been really good for wildlife, starts becoming less good for wildlife and biodiversity. So what you then need to do is kind of either go in manually and cut trees down, or a natural process would be to have, be it deer, be it in the old days, it might be cattle. I mean, originally it was things like oryx or bison or buffalo in the States that would go in and break woods apart and so on, and create clearings, and their dung would help fertilize things and bring insects in and so on. So you get this sort of complete circular process, which is beneficial, and that's where we are trying to get to, basically.
That's great. So this is being set up as an example of a proper way to do grouse moor. And you'd mentioned something to me that I'd love you to recount it for me. The story about meeting with the people that were for the against cruel sports. And the guy came out here, and after he saw what was on here, then he says, "Well, grouse moors are bad, except for Rottle."
Yeah.
So, could you tell us that story?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's maybe an apocryphal story because the head guy of the League Against Cruel Sports, I met him at an event. We were both speaking at this event. Obviously, he was speaking against grouse shooting and I was speaking in favour of it done right. And anyway, we got on very well. And I said, if you're passing, come and have a look round. So he came up, I showed him around, I explained what we did. He didn't agree with lots of what we did, but he I think, accepted the fact that I was open and honest with him. He saw a lot of wildlife. I think he went away with a slightly different view of grouse shooting. Anyway, a friend of mine or a colleague of mine was in a meeting with him some months later, and where he would normally say grouse moors are all bad, he said something like, well, most grouse moors are bad, but not all, sort of thing. So I thought, well, maybe I've at least started to change someone's view on the world. So
there is a movement against grouse moors. What do you think? What is going on? What is that? What's behind these attack on grouse moors? We kind of talked about it yesterday about people going after the high hanging fruit versus a low hanging.
Yeah.
But why are they going after grouse moors? What what is the problem here?
Personally, I think it's.
You rephrase the question.
No, that.
Grouse moors are
under
attack.
Yeah. I think the reason that.
Could you say that for me? Grouse moors are under attack, or our way of life is under attack, or something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, grouse moors are definitely under attack, and I think that when I look at it, there's no logic to it. There's a tiny bit of logic to it, but what I don't understand is. Grouse shooting is a very broad church, and what I don't understand is why there's almost a conflation between people who don't like shooting and upland management. And because grouse shooting happens on the uplands, people say, "Oh, grouse shooting is bad," rather than saying is this upland estate delivering net biodiversity gain or is it not? If it is, great, that's a good thing. I still don't like shooting, but to me, shooting's a separate debate. If you look at the statistics, there's a huge amount of wildlife on upland estates. Now, I accept that there are some moors that are very, very intensively managed and probably have break the law or have broken the law in the past, in the not too distant past. Those are held up as the norm, and what I'm standing up for is most moors which are like me. They try and run a balanced life. They don't want to break the law. They want to create a lot of biodiversity. They want to do the right thing, and they deliver in spades, in my opinion. Now, could they do it better? Maybe, but that's a debate we should all be having. How can we tweak this, make it better? Maybe, as I've done, do some riparian planting. And I just feel that there is an issue that people see grouse shooters as rich people who shoot, and they dislike the financial element or the, it's almost like a, dare I say, a class war where people think that people who shoot are rich and so it shouldn't happen. And actually, let's conflate that with the way they manage their land. And to me, shooting, if it's done right and a balanced management of a shooting estate, will deliver a lot of biodiversity. So to me, the debate is wrong. Are we delivering biodiversity, yes or no? If not, you should be changing your shooting practices. If you are delivering lots of biodiversity, good on you. That's the debate, in my opinion, we should be having. Yeah.
Great. Some of the conversations I've had with the rewilder side, the Balharis, the Andy Whitemans, the Peter Cairns, specifically centered on grouse moors, say grouse moors are being managed so intensively that it's being done to the detriment of the land and the species that live on that land. How would you respond to that? If I'm David Balhari and I'm like, grouse moors management is terrible because it's a detriment to the land and the animals that live on it. How do you respond to that?
I would say, look, what I've said to people before is, come to my estate, let's see how much wildlife we have, let's assess all these things. Let's go to another place. You pick an estate of your choice in the uplands that does the same thing that I do, i.e. it's upland, it's not a lowland estate, it's not full of trees, it's upland. And let's see what wildlife they have, and let's have a reasoned debate about it. Because I bet, and I'll say it now, I bet that I will have more wildlife than any other estate you could show me that doesn't shoot grouse. And so I think these things should be based on facts, not on emotion. And a lot of people like to think that grouse moors have nothing on them because they've never been on one and they've seen a picture of someone burning heather and they go, oh, it must burn all the wildlife, it hasn't got it. They don't see the nuances within that, the work we do, the balance we create where we're burning small fires and doing these other wildlife enhancing operations the whole time. And so to me, I would try and take the emotion out of it too and say, look, let's look at each land holding, and if a grouse moor is deemed to be doing all the wrong things and is not delivering net biodiversity gain, absolutely fine. I'll take your argument, but I don't believe that is the case. I think we should look at every land holding in Scotland and say, is it delivering net biodiversity gain? It should be nothing about shooting. It should be, are you delivering net biodiversity gain or are you not? And if you're not, why aren't you? And how do we change that? And that, to me, is a very unemotional, fact, evidence-driven process that I think would be way better to follow.
So we also hear the comment that basically people like you propagate heather deserts. How do you respond to that?
Well, again...
I'm saying up here, I've never been here. I'm a rewilder.
Yeah.
All you're just propagating a heather desert. Andy Whiteman. It's nothing but a heather desert.
I totally disagree. Look, I would say that I have not looked around every grouse moor in Scotland, but I have been on quite a few. I like to shoot, and kindly people ask me to shoot, and I have been on quite a few grouse moors. I always see a huge amount of wildlife abundance on them. I am sure there are examples, and I know I've seen examples photographically, I haven't seen them physically in England, where things are very, very intensively managed. And I think you could pick a worse example. If I'm being totally fair, you could probably pick the worst example of a grouse moor, and that would maybe be correct. But I think there's a huge number that are delivering in spades on the other side of that, and they are not deserts at all. They are full of multiple species of wildlife, bird life, plant life. They are retaining moisture on the hill, they're mitigating flooding, they're doing all these things. There's a lot of stacked benefits that a grouse moor can deliver. And you have to remember, it's not just delivering grouse shooting, it's delivering all these other benefits: peatland restoration, flood mitigation, ground nesting bird, wader territory for ground nesting birds like waders and so on. Stalking that happens on us. We also have a hydroelectric scheme which is collecting water on that same piece of ground and delivering renewable energy for 500 homes in Scotland. So, you've got to look at the whole picture. I think grouse shooting is a kind of a red herring. Are you managing your uplands well? Yes, you are. That's great. A byproduct of that is you have a few grouse to shoot, which ironically brings in more money, brings in tourism, helps local communities, and does all these other good things. So it needs to be looked at the round. Now, sure, if a person running an estate is not doing that, is not bringing in tourism, is not benefiting wildlife, is destroying the countryside, is polluting the rivers, absolutely, I would be the first person pointing the finger at him and saying, this is completely wrong, you need to change.
Andy Whiteman, Pete Cairns says that all raptor persecution happens on grouse moors. What do you say to that?
A lot of people think that raptor persecution happens on moorland disproportionately to anywhere else. I disagree with that. But again, I go back to what I said earlier about moorlands. There are a couple of hundred grouse moors in Scotland or whatever it is. I mean, I think it's 110 driven and probably a couple of hundred do walked up. So it's probably about 300 grouse moors in Scotland. Incidents, one from experience, I see a hell of a lot more raptors here and on other grouse moors than I see anywhere else. So
why?
Well, because there must be the food source there for them. It must be a good habitat for them to live in. So they do better, I believe, on grouse moors. Now, so the chances of finding a dead bird on a grouse moor is higher. Saying that, I don't for 1 minute say that no raptor persecution goes on. I think it does. I think there are idiots out there who do it, but there are idiots in every walk of life who kill raptors. Recent incidents have had people poisoning who are pigeon, they keep the racing pigeons and so on, or farmers who think that raptors are killing their lambs or whatever, and they've indiscriminately poisoned. So it's something that needs stamping out, but I don't think it is. I think a lot of grouse moors are unfairly tarnished with it. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not saying none of it goes on. I think there will be a few estates doing it. And I think they need to be cornered and caught. And I think there's this new legislation coming through Scottish Parliament of licensing for grouse moors, which, though I was opposed to the principle on freedom, on personal freedom grounds and on human rights grounds about licensing, I do see it gives the government a mechanism to isolate those who do carry it on. But I don't believe it happens in anything like the abundance that it's made out by those who are against shooting.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing. Why do you think it's a human rights issue?
Well, I think that, I see very much, we have a right of quiet enjoyment of our land, and I think that when the government can interfere and say what you can shoot and what you can't shoot. Now, there may be, unless there's a good reason. So the good reason might be that, species A is very, very, is declining, so we need to stop shooting, which is a perfectly valid reason. But I think when government starts saying what you can and can't shoot, who can and can't shoot it, and there's not a robust sort of legal process behind it, so they can just say, actually, today I don't like the look of your face, so you can't, I'm going to stop you shooting. I have great concerns. Hopefully the law will have a very robust legal process behind it, but it is a concern to me. I also think that gamekeepers, they have, again, if you look at the 300 places that shoot grouse, moorlands that shoot grouse, nearly all will be employing one gamekeeper, some will be employing multiple. Those gamekeepers have young families, they work hard, they don't break the law. In the main, the majority of them do not break the law. They just want to quietly go about doing their job, getting paid for it in something they enjoy. And every keeper I know is fantastically interested in wildlife. For them, it's not just about killing things. They have to kill the odd fox or the stoat or a weasel to protect other things, but they're really interested in wildlife. And I just think that we need to be careful we're not demonizing people unfairly, and I have a big concern that might be happening.
Do these keepers and their families have basic human rights? Should they? And
yes.
Some of these policies directly an affront to their basic human rights? The right to a quality job and a quality life?
I think they can be. And I think what happens is the polarised debate that happens in Parliament can create very uncomfortable situations, especially on social media for keepers and their families, where they're unnecessary or unfairly picked on for doing things which they haven't done. Now, if one gamekeeper persecutes a bird of prey, they deserve to go to prison and serve the sentence that that goes with it. But the majority of keepers don't do that, and it's a bit like saying, I don't know, one guy's a drunk driver, so all drivers are bad. It's just ridiculous. You can't single out. You can't say every keeper is bad because one keeper's broken the law type of thing. And I just find that really an issue. And as owners, we've got other things we can do. We've got we can change our life. We can stop shooting. This is someone's livelihood. It's not about us. It's about the rural communities, in my opinion. So I think that's really important. And I really hope the Scottish Government kind of is mindful of that when they pass this law, and they make sure it's workable and it's fair. And I would love to see an end to this polarisation, because I think there's a huge amount we all need to jump on together on climate change, which is way more important than picking fights or picking on people in something like grouse shooting, which, let's face it, is a tiny industry in the scheme of things. Climate change is the big thing we're facing, biodiversity loss. These are things where I feel we can all align and get behind and do something good for the country and the world, for that matter. But no, I think keepers have, human rights, and government need to remember that when they're enacting these policies.
One of the things that Balhari talks about is grouse moors is just, it's just a license to kill. Is grouse shooting nothing but, the motivation behind it, nothing but just to kill? And if it isn't, why?
No, grouse shooting is definitely not just about killing. I think you have to look at this in the context, and I think a lot of people who don't shoot don't understand this. So shooting is, as I said before, it's the byproduct of all the good work you do. Grouse are wild. You do lots of good work. You reduce your fox population, you reduce predation in the key springtime. We talked about this earlier, but there's that 2 months in spring where it's so important for ground nesting birds. So when you do that, you help black grouse, you help waders, you help red grouse, and a lot of other ground nesting birds from predation. That gives you a surplus to shoot. Now, with that surplus, you can bring in people who pay to stay in local accommodation to come and shoot. But it's not about killing stuff. What you're doing when you're shooting is you're going out and you're enjoying time in the wild, you're enjoying time with your friends and family, and you're enjoying watching your dogs work, and you're shooting something which you then go away to eat. And that is the purity of the sport. Now, we talked about this. I think, there is a tendency that some of that can be eroded by, for example, people putting millions of pheasants down and wanting to shoot lots of stuff. But that is not the core of what shooting is about. It's about, being out in the wild, being with your friends and family, and enjoying their company and enjoying some sport. So, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about. You kind of hinted at that there. He talks about shooting animals with lead shot. Nobody wants to eat this. The animals all have to be buried because there is nobody eating them. This whole idea of high volume. I mean, there's some issues. There's some optics problems with shooting.
Yeah, definitely.
What are those optics problems, and how can they be corrected?
So I definitely think there's some problems with the optics for shooting. I think one of the changes that's happened in my lifetime is when I was growing up, if you shot, you went out to shoot and you had a driven pheasant shoot, for example, you maybe shoot 80 or 100 birds and you thought, wow, we got to 100. That's an amazing day and fantastic. The numbers have crept up, more money around maybe, and suddenly it's 200 birds and 300 birds and 400 birds. And then you think, well, what is enough? And I think that optics is bad. I think there's a lot of evidence around lead now. I see both sides. There's a debate about ballistics. Lead is obviously better at killing things humanely. There's been some argument about steel recently. I think the new steel that's come out, we've been using steel for 2 years now and we're finding it's fine. But again, as an industry, I think we need to say we're going to use non-lead shot. We are saying that, but I think we need to transition as quickly as possible. I think we need to put less birds down. I think we need to be again, going back to my original point, we need to deliver net biodiversity gain. And what does that mean? Does that mean that you can only shoot 100 birds in a day? Does it mean you can shoot 200? I don't know. But that should be evidence driven, and we should make sure that what we are not doing is creating harm to the environment. But moving away from lead shot is a big step forward. Making sure that everything we shoot gets eaten is another, and then making sure that we don't put too many birds down that's detrimental to other wildlife, flora or fauna, I think is important too. Those are the three main bits I would say.
Great. One of the things that David Ballard told us on the first go around, and this goes back to the people that work for you, are the people that work for you serfs? And I want you to use the word, and I want you to say yes or no, and this is why.
So he said that people are serfs who work for me.
The keepers and the stalkers and the gillies are serfs. They don't know, and to give you context, he says, they don't know it, but they're already out of business because we're going to have these foreign billionaires come in, Anders Paulson, buy up all these estates and put in tourism infrastructure because he has the money, and those types of people have the money to invest in the highlands.
So calling rural workers like stalkers or gamekeepers serfs is the most ridiculous and patronising thing I think I've heard on the subject. So the rural workers or the gamekeepers that we have employed here are well trained, well educated. They get a decent wage, house provided, vehicle provided, heating provided, council tax, etc. provided. They are paid very well, rightly so, because they are good at what they do. So I think that comment is ridiculous and actually probably more undermines or underlines where the lack of knowledge that person has on the subject, which I think is dangerous. And actually it's a very polarizing type of comment. What I would say is if billionaires come in and buy up all this land for ecotourism, which I don't think will happen. I think there'll be a balance. I think a lot of hunting is a growing sport in the UK. It's seen as much more affordable for everyone these days. But even so, these gamekeepers are so well trained and they've done courses on, quad bike driving and muir burn and health and safety and all these things. they would be very, very good rural workers in any context. So say that this estate transitioned to purely eco, I would very easily be able to redeploy them. But one of the things that we will always need to do is predator control. The RSPB do it, all the big environmental NGOs do it, though they don't like talking about it. And if we're going to have a balanced and abundant wildlife population, we need predator control. And where we need predator control, we need gamekeepers. Simple as that. You can call them something else if you like, but that's what they'll be.
So one of the things they talk about is this tourism economy, this rewilding economy. It hasn't been proven. They admit it.
Yeah.
Trees for Life, Nigel Fraser, and he's a very astute land manager and transactions and all this stuff. He says, and Pete Cairns, same thing. It is our goal that we're going to create this economy based around tourism and recreation. What do you say about that in regards to the Highlands, knowing what's here, knowing what the sites are, knowing what the land is like? Is a tourism-based economy a viable 24/7, 365-day a year that's going to employ your keeper when he's renamed a wildlife guide?
No.
Is it a viable economy?
It's a difficult question to answer, because at the moment I would say no, it isn't, because
I need you to tell me
that
recreational.
I don't think the recreational ecotourism today is a viable model. I think a lot of people, and I sympathise with them, but what they're doing is they're saying 2 and 2 equals 5. We know from tourism, getting from an idea, which is ecotourism, to it delivering on the ground, it doesn't just happen on its own. It will take time, it will take whatever. And to me, what we need in Scotland is a balance between ecotourism, which I'm all in favour of, and hunting, shooting, fishing, these other sports which already bring thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people into Scotland spending money. Why alienate them when it's something that Scotland delivers so well? Absolutely build up the ecotourism business behind it. I have no issue with that at all. And I think that's a great thing. And there's great opportunities in Scotland to do that. But it is definitely not there. It's not proven. And for people to say, oh, well, this will just happen mysteriously over the next year and it re-employ all these people unemployed by not shooting is just not the case, in my opinion. So,
Let's talk about the government. I don't know if you're comfortable about that, but the nemesis in my film is the SNP government. Their policies, their actions are anti-rural community, anti-wildlife. I don't care what they say. The actions speak louder than words. What do you think of your government, and how are their policies and what they do? Is it beneficial to the rural communities and the wildlife, or is it not beneficial? And like I said, I'd like you just to tell me the reality.
Yeah, okay. Well,
I don't need you to candy coat it.
No. So Scottish government is a complicated issue. We get on. I mean, there are 2 ministers that are involved, or there's 3 now. There's 1 Green minister, and there are 2 SNP ministers who are involved with the environment. 2 of them, the 2 SNP ones, I get on with perfectly well. They're perfectly reasonable. They get what you're trying to tell them. The problem is that we are run in this country by a dominant central belt of urban MSPs who don't understand rural issues. So they might go back and go, I think we should do this, this and this. But often that is ignored because I believe everything they do is viewed through the prism of independence. So they think, what will win us votes? There are some very good rural SNP MSPs, and they really try and fight our corner, but they're often outvoted. And that is my concern, is we're not listening to rural economy. And what's happened recently, and not just about grouse shooting, there's rural housing issues, there's all sorts of, there's short and long term lets, there's all sorts of things where there's no tourism minister, for example. I mean, tourism is one of the biggest industries in Scotland, and they're not even got a minister for tourism. These things are undermining rural communities, and the ferries, you've heard about the ferries. I mean, this is all about rural communities, and there seems to be an ongoing assault on rural economies, rural communities.
Could you say that one more time? There's an ongoing assault.
There seems to be an ongoing assault on rural communities at the moment. Be they in the Western Isles, be they grouse shooters, be they people who in the tourism industry. There's not a tourism, as I say, there's not a tourism minister, and I just have grave concern that we are ignoring that at our peril, because that is what keeps rural communities going. That brings in a lot of money to Scotland, and that is going to undermine us. And I just feel that we need to take this really seriously. And the other thing about rural communities and land managers is we are in a position to help meet climate change targets 30 by 30 and 2045. So we need to all work together. And at the moment, we feel that there's an ongoing assault against us. And that, I think, is really depressing, actually, because we could turn this around and actually be a real force for good and really help government hit a lot of their targets.
So you said, you alluded to this. Talk about land reform. What is land reform? Why does it exist? And what do you think the outcomes will be? And I don't mean what the government will decide to do, but what if they do what they're talking about? How will that affect the ground and the people?
So you have to start from the context of the Scottish government. A lot of their aims are laudable aims. I'll start with that because they are laudable aims. The problem happens between having a decision of what they want to try and do to where the law is enacted, a lot changes, and so they deliver a lot of bad laws. And I have a great fear that land reform will be another bad law. It's trying to tackle bad land ownership, but they kind of want to put it in a one-size-fits-all. So they talk about size of land. Well, as you know, some big landowners are the best landowners in the country and are delivering massive benefits to local communities, everything. Others are bad. Some tiny landowners are terrible. So this kind of size thing, I think, is wrong. So my fear is that the unintended consequences of this will not achieve any of the goals they want, and actually will hinder inward investment into land in Scotland. And I just think that's a real shame. There are already mechanisms which will allow the Scottish government to interfere where landowners, where big or small, are not looking after their land properly. I think environmental stuff should be really important. I think if you're not looking after your land for the environment, if you're polluting, if you're doing these things, that should be a trigger that Scottish government can come in and act and say, well, actually, if you don't put these things right, we will compulsory purchase your land off you because you're not acting in a responsible way. And with land, to quote Andrew Thin, with land right or land ownership comes responsibilities, and it does, and we take that very seriously. But again, a bit like I was talking about biodiversity before, and measure everything land holdings on their biodiversity achievements, measure landowners on what they're doing for the community, not if they are running their estates in a good way, they should be recognised for that. And again, I would like to get everyone, we've got good land managers, we've got a government that wants to achieve certain things. I think we could actually be on the same page in a lot of stuff, but there's this polarising debate which drives us apart the whole time, and it's not helpful because it's not conducive to achieve anything.
So since we're talking about government mandates and government policies, grouse-moor licensing. Is grouse-moor licensing a good thing? Bad thing? Why? How will that affect the final outcome? Because I've got keepers telling me, like this kid that quit up at Edenglass.
Yeah.
I don't, all I need is a walker to come up here, have a conversation with him, or her, and they go back and they call the police and say, I think this guy's unhinged. Okay, now he immediately loses his firearms license. But if now under the auspices of this new Grousemore licensing scheme, if there is even found like a raptor that's found dead there, some walker finds a dead raptor and calls it in, you lose your license until the investigation, as I understand it, until the investigation is completed. So now these keepers are saying, will I have a job? Will my kids have food? Will we have a house to live in? How does that cotton for you when it comes to this Grousemore licensing scheme that the government's proposing?
I'm very concerned about the Grousemore licensing scheme. It's going through Parliament now. Some of the suggestions in it are very concerning, and hopefully they will change those, because we're lobbying hard to make them change them. But I have big reservations about it, and for me, purely with my own land management hat on, there are two things. One, the license is for 1 year, and there is a robust process for appealing and all the rest of it. However, Nature Scott can decide, there's an appropriateness test, so they can decide whether it's appropriate that you have a license or not. Now, that's not defined, so they can say about me next year, oh, well, we've decided it's not appropriate you have a license, irrespective of whether there's been anything said about me or the estate or whatever. They could just say, well, we don't like the look of you today. So not that that would happen, because Nature Scott are a very reasonable organisation, but things change and that could happen. And my worry is, one, I wouldn't be able to employ keepers, because I can say, well, I've only got a licence for a year, and next year it might go. And they're thinking, well, why should I come and work on the Grousemore when I can go and work in a pheasant shoot and I know I'll be there for years to come? Also, I don't want to invest in the Grousemore because I've only got a 1-year licence. Now, what I said to Nature Scott is, why don't we have a 10-year licence? And if someone's done something wrong or suspicious, you could then put them on a sort of probation and say, well, actually, I think you've done something wrong. We can't prove it. So you're going to have to apply every year for a license, because we think, you might have, but that's based on some evidence and so on. And to me, a system like that would be good, whereas the law-abiding owners like me would have a 10-year license, and we could just crack on and run and feel comfortable that we're in a position to employ people and invest in the grouse shooting side of it.
Well, last question I have, and we might have one more after that, but there's all this conflict. This country's been full of conflict from the beginning.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as recorded history, there's always conflict between people. In this modern age, there's this conflict between the sporting estates, the landowners, with the people that they employ, with these people that are rewilders, incomers, white settlers.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard all this stuff. And of course, the government people, we said earlier, they're out of touch with, because they live down in the population belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And so how, knowing what we do know about the planet, how are we going to deal with, how are we going to come together? And you've said some things that are along that lines in the past. We got climate change. We got a lot bigger things to worry here than whether or not we shoot a grouse or not. But how do we bring these different sides, these dispirited sides, back together? Because ultimately, what I see is they're not that far. I mean, the David Balhari, as much of a lightning rod he is, loves hunting.
Yeah.
So if you got a guy, and that's a whole lot better than the people down in London who hate hunting no matter what, and never will like hunting. But as a management tool, we know that it's critical.
Yeah.
So how do we bring all these sides, these dispirited sides together?
I mean, I think bringing all the different sides to this together is the challenge we face. As you rightly say, I think we don't disagree on a lot of stuff. Funnily enough, the hunting element is very emotional, very emotive. But I think that's irrelevant to this whole debate, because this debate surely is about climate change and biodiversity loss. How do we stem that? How do we stop that? How do we reverse it? Now, I don't believe shooting and hunting is relevant to that. If we are delivering that, shooting and hunting is a byproduct of delivering that well. So we should be focusing on that. And we should, look, we disagree on hunting. Let's put it to one side. It's not relevant right now. What's relevant is, are we delivering? Now, if your hunting is detrimental to delivering net biodiversity gain and climate change mitigation, as I said before, you shouldn't be doing it. I don't believe it is. I think it is the byproduct of delivering this. I don't actually think that there's an issue there. So I think we need to focus on the bits we can agree on, focus on working together, but I think we do that by breaking down barriers. So what I've tried to do here is get a lot of MSPs, ministers, NGOs to visit me. And I said, this is what we're doing. I have an open book. I show them everything. They can go wherever they like. I'm honest. I tell them all the things that we've failed on, all the things we've succeeded on. And I hope they go away thinking, actually, that he's not a bad sort of bloke. We can work with him. And I'm hoping I'll get more owners to do the same, so we get everyone onto the same page. Because I think it's vital. It's not for us now, it's for our kids, isn't it? We want to do this so we leave the world in a good position. And let's face it, over the last 30 years, we have totally ballsed it up for our children, and we need to reverse that. And I am so passionate about trying to change that around. So I want to make it work. So I'm going to try my utmost. And that's what I'm trying to do, is to get everyone on the same page and make this happen.
Great. I didn't ask you before. Could you tell how many people do you employ here at the estate, and some idea of the economic impact that you provide to this community?
Oh, blimey. We employ about 7 full-time people, and then some part-time people as well. And yeah, I mean, probably £500,000 goes into the local community every year, I would guess. Whether it's to staff, whether it's to local suppliers, things like that. You know, local government with taxes and council tax and VAT and all these sort of things. But it's that sort of quantum, I would say. Yeah.
And does this estate make money off of itself? Is it self-sustaining, or are you having to supplement it? Like almost every single estate I know of.
Yeah, well, it is. So the last few years I have had to put money in because of COVID and various other things. But normally, because we have the hydroelectric scheme, that's made a big difference. And I would say it washes its face just about. But it's, you know, it's not an easy living. It's an enjoyable living, but it's not an easy living. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, because I don't care if it's grouse moors, deer stalking, rewilding, carbon, whatever it is, unless you got a huge, electric generation going on, whether it be wind or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't see any of the estates in the Highlands making money.
No.
And most of them don't break even by any means.
No, I think that's the challenge. And going back to the debate about ecotourism, I mean, we struggle to make a living with, hunting and all the other things we do and the farming and whatever. If you went directly to ecotourism, and if you look at, we already have a right to responsible access. So I could have a whole load of golden eagle nests here. Well, people don't need to pay me to come in. They can just walk on the land anywhere and go and see the golden eagle. So I think that when you manage land, you realize it's a lot more complicated to make it pay than when you don't. When you don't, you think of all the income, but none of the cost element to it. And that's the problem. You've got to employ people. If you go down the ecotourism route, you need people employed on the ground, and someone comes in and what can you charge one person? £50? I mean, you've got to have a hell of a lot of them coming into, for a day visit to make it pay. And okay, they can stay in your cottage, but it's, a shooter pays £500 or £1,000 for a day. So you can see how that can make a difference quite quickly.
Yeah, well, we've seen that in Africa with the photographic versus the hunting. You can take, there's been studies done where, the place that does dual recreation, hunting and phototourism, that might take 10,000 phototourists through. And the footprint of 10,000 people coming through your land and all the resources you need, the infrastructure, the pollution that's created, the habituation of wildlife. And then you have the hunters, and it may be 8 or 12 hunters in that fill that same economic.
With a much lower ecological footprint.
Huge,
Yeah.
huge. But economically, it's the same footprint.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, $500,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you have the same thing going on, but again, you don't need to have the resources. You don't have to all the staff.
Yeah.
And of course, the other thing is with wildlife, everything is programmed to exceed the carrying capacity of the land. It's always breeding.
Yeah.
All right. So you always have more on the land.
Yeah.
And so unless you don't manage it, then you have problems.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this last night. Without apex predators, there's we as humans need to be that apex predator.
Well, Dee, it's been a great pleasure to be here at Rottle Estate up in the Angus Glens, speaking to you and being able to see with you your vision for your land, your attempts at being a good land steward, and how that affects all the other creatures that live on the estate and the water that flows off of the estate and down to other places. And so I want to say thank you for all the time that you've given us. It's been extremely insightful, and just thanks again for being a part of this project. Hey, folks, just reminding you that the film The Last Keeper is going to be available in late June on our website, theshepherdsofwildlife.org. If you want to sign up for updates on film festival screenings, some of our other events we've got going on, including where you can watch the film, go to shepherdsofwildlife.org/keeper, KEEPER. Anyways, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. You can find this podcast wherever great podcasts live, including on the Shepherds of Wildlife Society website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. Please tell a friend, and let's save wildlife together.